Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our adult education class today. I can tell you that my name is Austin Rehbein because I have a fancy new name tag.
Yay.
Today, we are continuing our series on truth and reconciliation with just a very brief context of the criminal justice system, specifically the incarceration system, and thinking through what theological truths undergird a system like that, and how thinking differently might play better into our theological convictions, and where reconciliation and restorative justice might change the way the system is. So just a brief topic will be done in about an hour, and then we'll have solved everything. I'm hoping to do some background context today so that next week when Alvin from Underground Ministries comes to speak, we have we're setting him up well.
Can you explain just briefly who's coming next week?
Yeah, Alvin Shim works for Underground Ministries, and they operate out of Mount Vernon. They are a group that tries to the program that they're doing now is one parish, one prisoner. They say there are about as many prisoners in Washington as there are churches, and there are so many struggles that people have coming out of the underground. That's what they call the system of incarceration. When they come out of prison, it's like they're coming out of the tombs and looking for resurrection. And without community help, there are so many different barriers to functioning in society again. And so they set up systems of letter writing with churches so that when people come out, they have a community of people who are ready to support them, and relationships that are being built, and folks who can help them figure out how to get their driver's license, how to get a job, how to find somewhere to live, and mostly how to have a community of relationships. And trauma theory comes a lot into that too. They do psychological help, spiritual help. There's so much shame that needs to be undone in order for people to function after coming out of a system that tells them you're worthless. So originally when I had this topic, got assigned this topic from Kelly, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to talk about Underground Ministries the whole time. And then I found out that they're coming next week. So it's like, we'll find a few other things to talk about. One of the things that the way that they frame their ministry that I love is they frame every aspect of their ministry through the story of Lazarus coming out of the tomb, and every aspect of what it's like to come out of the tomb with grave clothes, and have analogies for what that's like today of people coming out of prison. And it's really beautifully done. Today we're going to watch a video of one of the people who really influenced Underground Ministries, Greg Boyle. Has anybody heard of Greg Boyle, Homeboy Industries? Oh, good. Always excited when I know I'm coming in with something a little bit new. So in 15 minutes, we need to start the video. You're my timekeeper.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to know where you are in your thinking about the system of incarceration in the US. What are your thoughts? What are your questions? What background are you bringing in today? An open-ended question. Yeah, Jack.
Jack, you're muted, but we want to hear what you say.
Yeah, I think very generally, we tend to think of incarceration as a solution. And I think in many ways, incarceration extends the problem for people. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit of an out of sight, out of mind strategy.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind strategy. It's presented as a solution, but it actually might be a problem.
Well, I had not thought of it very much before, but when we did the South Africa videos about truth and reconciliation, so much of what was good about that was getting the victims to speak up, and actually in some cases getting perpetrators to speak up and admit what they did. But more important, to get the victims to be able to tell their story. And it never occurred to me before then that our justice system is not set up to allow the victims to tell their story and what it meant to them. It's set up to prove the guilt or innocence of the perpetrator. It's not set up to allow any closure for the victims. And I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah. It's the removal strategy. We get this person out of the way and the victim will be fine, rather than like actually the relationship might need to heal together.
Or just give them a chance to speak up somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. As opposed to just.
It's not unique to the United States. The article in the paper yesterday, I didn't read the article much, but I saw the headline. It said in England, they're at capacity and they don't know what to do.
And it's a terrible injustice when you look at the numbers of blacks and black men in particular incarcerated compared to the percentage of white men incarcerated. And some of them for very minor crimes, and their lives are ruined after that.
Mhm.
And how some states allow them to vote and some states don't,
Yeah.
once they've come out.
Any other thoughts?
There was also a TV interview recently with a woman who in Washington State who was incarcerated, did her time, and came out and studied for a law degree at Seattle University, and is now a state representative in the Washington State Legislature.
Awesome.
And she speaks up for incarcerated people.
I would love to hear what she has to say. Do you know her name?
I forget her name, but I remember
Okay.
reading this story recently. Yeah.
Awesome.
Just one other thing. In terms of underground ministries, Chris Hoke, the founder, came and spoke at a church where I was previously leading university ministries. And I remember Chris Hoke asking at the start of our conversation for folks to raise their hand if they knew someone who was currently or previously incarcerated. And it was incredible just how many hands were raised. And he pointed out the fact that this is something that touches on most of our lives, but it's also something that most of us don't talk about or don't know how to talk about. And this comes back to your point of the shame involved in incarceration. And so part of their hope is just to get more people engaging with the topic, a topic we are very quiet about, but affects most of us actually.
How many of us here know someone who is in prison currently or has been? Yeah, more than half. It's a great question because it is something that doesn't often come up. Thanks everyone for sharing. So what do you think the current system is designed for? The system of sentencing people to time in prison. That's just sort of a reality that we've grown up with, right? What happens if you do something wrong? You go to jail and you have to do your time.
Punishment.
Punishment.
Protection of the innocent.
Protection of the innocent.
Retribution.
Retribution.
We have the word justice. Somehow justice seems to be tied up into our imagination around prison.
Yeah.
We
Well,
call
and
it justice,
yeah.
right? Wait.
Yeah.
We have an
there's
idea of
more to be said there.
Justice as punishment or retribution, then revenge. Justice and revenge are sometimes synonymous in our culture. Something that I discovered in my reading, does anyone know the origin of the word penitentiary?
Penitent is.
Penitent? Yeah, there was, after the Revolutionary War, there was quite a bit of prison reform in our country, largely because folks here wanted to distance themselves from the system in England. Like, we're not brutal like they are. And so it was folks who, before this, folks who were imprisoned were not people who were sentenced to a crime, were not violent people. They were sort of the undesirables of society. People were in debtor's prison. People, poor people were sort of like pushed off the streets and into prison and just kept there. So it was a way to separate the undesirables from the rest of society, but it wasn't a punishment. I mean, they were being punished, but it wasn't, if you were sentenced to something, you were sentenced to death or mutilation and then let go. Criminals were not kept in prisons. The penitentiary rethought this because it was done by Quakers who said, people will reform if we give them a chance to encounter God. And they thought that would happen by keeping them completely confined in solitary. Because if they are on their own, they will have an encounter with God in prayer. I think we know differently now. We know that being alone for years without human contact is really harmful to everything about a person.
Or with human contact with people who are
Yeah.
maybe worse than they are.
Yeah. Well, in this system, even the guards were wearing masks so you wouldn't see another person's face.
My goodness.
And now we think of that as a form of punishment. But at this point, this was the revolutionary, like, this is how we're going to rehabilitate people.
Mm.
So that was where the penitentiary idea comes from. So we said the current system is designed for retribution, punishment, separating the dangerous people from the good people. What underlying beliefs might support a system like this? So what are some things that we need to believe in order to be at peace with that system?
Well, as you stated, we're keeping the population safe. We're keeping the good people safe from bad people.
Yes,
Well, that
so
there
that there
are-
is even a distinction, yeah,
But
between.
there are good people and bad people.
Good
And
people.
those are bad people.
Mhm. And people are defined by one thing that they've done. This is not a person
Right.
who committed robbery. This is a robber. This is a murderer. This is a rapist.
Mhm.
They are defined by the worst thing that they've done, which they have to be, so that we don't see them as people and we can be okay with them being there, right?
Hmm.
How about a single person alone bears 100% of the responsibility for their actions, rather than that they are coming out of a system that might have formed them in a way that violence begets violence. Bad people hurt people, rather than phrase that we probably all heard now, hurt people hurt people. I was thinking of the idea of the scarcity of care. We can't care for the good people unless we're not caring for the bad people. So in order for us to care for the good people well, we have to put the bad people away. There's not enough for everyone. We can't take care of everyone.
You know, this comes right out of our lost heritage,
Mm.
right? Because God has already chosen those who will go to heaven. And so if somebody commits a crime, they're not going to heaven and they need to be separated from the rest of us.
Right.
So it's a pre-heaven separation.
And they didn't, in their act of, say, murder, they didn't choose to not go to heaven. In their act of murder, they have revealed whether or not they were chosen in the first place. That's the history of election.
Pretty closely tied with the Presbyterian history.
Mhm,
Yes.
mhm. So I think that the system that we have, feel free to disagree with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think the system that we have is complicit in perpetuated cycles of violence. I've said this before, by answering violence for violence. I think that it does not affirm human dignity or human capacity for goodness, change, and healing. I think it relies on an ethic of fear and intimidation. How many of you have heard of this book, The New Jim Crow? Yeah. Has anybody read it? I've gotten through half.
I have.
Awesome.
Mary
Thanks,
had?
Mary.
Yeah. And it's tough to read.
It definitely is tough to read. Damon was telling me he's currently reading it and that it's been making him feel pretty hopeless. So The New Jim Crow was a revolutionary book when it came out 15 years ago. And it is making the argument that the current system of incarceration is how racism in our country has evolved over time. That once the Jim Crow era ended, racism, it would say, goes underground and then comes out like with rears a different head, right? The Hydra, you cut off a head, it comes out in a new way. And that the incarceration system is the new way that racism and enslavement of peoples has come about in our society. So it says mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. We're colorblind, but that doesn't help us to see the things that are going on. So this book will give you the statistic, I think this one's on your sheet, that the US has 5% of the world population, but 25% of the world's imprisoned people. In 1980, there were 700,000 folks in prisons and jails in our country. In 2023, there are over 2 million. And then today that there are more African American men in jails and prisons in America than there were enslaved people in America in 1850.
Wow.
That's 10 years before the Civil War. More men in jails than there were total enslaved peoples in America. So this book is saying that once the Jim Crow system became illegal in America, folks found another way to disenfranchise African Americans, to use free labor. It talks about the prison work system, talks about the school to prison pipeline, all of these ways that mass incarceration, the war on drugs, that the justice system in America has been used to take away the rights of people who legally had rights, but once those rights were given, we need to find another way to take them away. And her argument is that mass incarceration is the way that that's been done. So I recommend that this book, it is very heavy on statistics and history. It is also pretty depressing. This book, this is another one that Damon was reading that I really appreciate. It's called Rethink Incarceration in America. And it presupposes the new Jim Crow perspective. It presupposes Brian Stevenson's perspective. Have you heard Just Mercy? Brian Stevenson is the man who did work in, was it Mississippi or Alabama? Birmingham, with folks on death row who, many of them were there with false accusations. Is that it? So revealing the reality in that system. And he goes into what a different system might look like, advocating for justice that restores. He goes into more of a theological underpinnings rather than just the social, like Michelle Alexander did.
What was the name of the second book? I missed that.
Rethinking Incarceration, Advocating for Justice that Restores.
Okay,
And it's
thank
by
you.
Dominique Dubois Gilliard, who we just.
And it's on the handout, and I will send the handout. If she sends it to me by PDF, I will send it to all of you by email.
Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great.
Quickly running out of time. This class goes fast, doesn't it? I think I want to jump into the video that I have. Again, I'm hoping this week to talk more about think more about the theological implications of our system and what theological convictions we have that would lead us to changing the system. And Greg Boyle of Homeboy Industries in Southern California, is he in LA? He's worked with rehabilitating gang members who've been imprisoned. Through compassion and kinship are his keywords. So we're gonna watch a 20-minute video of him sharing his thoughts on what his ministry has been like. Oh yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you. I want to apologize. Some of you have probably heard me talk before. It happens. I was speaking at a foster grandparents gathering some years ago, and I had spoken at it the summer before that. I don't know why they invited me 2 summers in a row, but after the second talk, a grandmother came up to me. I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands, and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." So, kind of hoping she was misspeaking there. Anyway, thank you for your attention. You know, anybody just wants some attention, especially folks on the margins. I had a homie, a gang member, step into my office the other day, very earnest 16-year-old gang member, standing in front of my desk, and he says, "Look, I need your divided attention." I said, "You are in luck." You know, I suppose there's a vision that brings you to a place like this, a theater for the day, and it's a vision of wanting to see the world looking differently than it currently looks. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But nobody wants to wait for too long. We want to make something happen, and that's what I want to suggest in the brief time I have with you. That what we all want to create and form is a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. I suspect that Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we create and imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? And to that end, what we hope to do, all of us, I think, is to inch our way out to the margins so that we can stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, that we can stand with those whose dignity has been denied, with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Occasionally, you get very fortunate and blessed to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I suspect that if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we would in fact be celebrating it. For no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no peace. So for 25 years, it's been the privilege of my life to work with gang members, and they've taught me everything of value, really. But especially in the last couple of years, they taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them. I find that it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, and so I'm pretty dexterous at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, you know, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. And so there I am with two homies, Manuel and Poncho. They're older vatos who work in at Homeboy Industries. We have 400 employees there. And guys have been to prison and tattooed. They do a variety of things. They're going to help me give a talk in Palm Desert at a high school. And so we meet at 9. We get in the car. 15 minutes on the road, Manuel's in the front seat, and he gets an incoming text. And he chuckles to himself. And I said, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I had just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazote as the day began. And Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in all our workers. It's a tough job. I said, well, what's he say? Oh, gosh, hang on. It's dumb. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing, you know, and then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies, rivals. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How can we achieve a certain kind of compassion that stands in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it? For the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them, in mutuality. It was a great privilege of my life to know Cesar Chavez as a friend, and I can remember once a reporter had commented to him, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled, and he says, the feeling's mutual. And that's what we want to achieve, is this sense of mutuality, where we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we're separate. No us and them, just us. For there's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it, and the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we stand against that idea? Well, Homeboy Industries was born nearly 25 years ago when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs there, half of those gangs at war with the other half. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 180th some months ago. We did a lot of things. We started a school and then a jobs program, and when we couldn't find enough jobs, we started our first business, Homeboy Bakery, in 1992. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Not everything worked, you know, I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing was not a huge success. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now we didn't intend to do this, but we have backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry center in the country.
From the beginning, we've dreamed of creating a better future.
Got an ad, huh?
Now, we're setting out to be carbon neutral by 2050. And we're gonna keep dreaming. No.
So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors. Keep in mind there are 1,100 gangs in LA County and 86,000 gang members. And so you name anything that might be helpful, we do it, from curricular things like anger management and parenting. Lots and lots of mental health counselors, case managers, job developers, free tattoo removal. No place on the planet removes more tattoos than we do. We have a designated clinic, 3 laser machines, 29 doctors, 800 treatments a month. And it was all started because of a guy named Frank who wandered out of Corcoran State Prison, 2 days out of prison. And he wanders into my office and he's sitting in front of me and tattooed on his forehead like a banner, like a billboard, and pardon my French, it says, "Fuck the world." Wow. Yeah. And he said, you know, I'm having a hard time finding a job. And I said, Frank, you know, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, you know. So anyway, I found a doctor who donated some time, and little by little, we chipped away at his forehead. And we have our chips and salsas and all the Ralphs and Food for Less, and we have Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food in the City Hall. We're about to move into the LAX American Airlines terminal. We'll have put a restaurant there. Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. We're in 24 different farmers markets. Where we have the solar panel installation training program, and Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude, will gladly take your order. Last year, you know, at the cafe, we had a visit from Diane Keaton, the Oscar-winning actress, movie star, Annie Hall, Godfather movies, and she's there with a guy who's there once a week, and her waitress this day is Glinda, and Glinda's a homegirl, been there, done that, tattooed, been to prison, a felon, a parolee. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, "What do you recommend?" And Glinda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, "I'll have that second one. That sounds good." And then something dawns on Glinda at exactly that moment. She says, "Wait a minute, I feel like I know you from somewhere, like maybe we've met." And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. "Oh gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before." And then Glinda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together." That just took my breath away when I heard it, and I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings since that moment. But suddenly kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind. And if you'll permit me to speak for God, Jesus says it pretty clearly, that you may be one. That's the whole thing, that you may be one. That's the hope, anyway. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, calls enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. You don't hold the bar up and ask anybody to measure up. You just show up and you hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth.
Mhm.
You say, you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch people become that truth. You watch them inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No four-prison wall can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But sometimes you have to reach in and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way so that the soul can feel its worth. No homie resisted my offers of help more than a kid named Bandit. He was a gang member, lived in Aliso Village housing projects. I would ride my bike in the middle of the night, and I'd see him run up to cars and sell crack cocaine and walk away counting his money. I'd say, how about a real job? And he was very polite, that's okay, G, thanks, though. Until one day, 15 years ago, he shows up in my office. I couldn't believe he was there. And he says what gang members often say, I'm tired of being tired. So I walked him to one of our job developers, and as luck would have it, they located an entry-level, unskilled, low-paying job, first kind of job in a warehouse. Now cut to today, Bandit runs the whole thing. He's the supervisor of the supervisors, owns his own home, he's married, has 3 kids. Well, I hadn't heard from him in like 2 years, and he calls me one Friday afternoon a little bit breathless and panicky. He says, gee, you got to bless my daughter. I said, ¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital? Oh, no. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College. Imagine my oldest, she's going to college, but she's a little chaparrita and we're afraid for her. You think there's any way you could give her a blessing before she goes? I go, are you kidding? I'd be honored. Look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have baptisms at 1. Why don't you come at 12:30? We'll do a little send-off. And sure enough, Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids show up at 12:30. And we situate everybody in front of the altar. And I said, well, let's put Jessica in the middle. Let's surround her with our bodies and with our love. Everybody touch her, connect to her. Put your hands on her shoulder, on her arms. Go ahead, put your hands on her head. And I say, bow your heads, close your eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on and on. And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice we've all become chillones. We're all crying, we're all sniffling. I don't know why we're crying. Except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So, we kind of wipe our eyes and we laugh about how mushy we got. And so to change the subject, I look at Jessica. Hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? She was very quick. Forensic psychology. I go, damn, forensic psychology. And Bandit chimes in, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And Jessica, very deadpan, looks at her father and she does one of these. And he sees her and says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we walk up to the car and big abrazos and they pile in the car, but Bandit hangs back. I'm glad he has. And I say, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes well up with tears. And he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. People always ask me about enemies who work together. It's kind of tense at first. A homie will come in and say, I'm ready, I'm ready. And I'll say, okay, I have an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z. And I rattle off the names of rivals. And they always say the same thing. They always say, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them. But, that used to bother me in the early days. But, the truth is, human beings can't demonize people they know. It's hard to sustain that, really. So I had a homie named Youngster, a little tiny guy. Everybody called him Youngster. And I thought he was ready, so I bring him into the Homeboy silkscreen factory, and I introduce him to all his 30 coworkers. That's our biggest business, huge factory. And I watch him as he shakes hands with everybody, looking them in the eyes, even enemies, until he gets to the last guy, a guy everybody called Puppet, and Puppet seems to be avoiding this encounter altogether. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they kind of mumble something. They stare at their shoes. They don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies, but he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discover later that this is a hatred that's quite personal and deep, beyond which neither of them think they can get past. So I sense that at the moment, and I say, hey, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job. And they say nothing. 6 months later, Puppet is walking to a corner store not far from his home and buys something. But on the way home, he kind of takes a detour, a shortcut, cuts into an alley. Suddenly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. They beat him badly. He falls to the ground. While he's lying on the ground, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lying there lifeless. Somebody finds his body, takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead, though it's the policy there to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours, so the doctors can get 2 days of a flat read, then they sign the death certificate. This allowed family and friends to gather. I was in St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many, many times its size. It was horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on him. So at the end of the 48-hour period, I gave him a blessing. I anointed his forehead with oil. We disconnected. And a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, I'm alone in my office. It's 8:30 at night, and the phone rings, and it's Youngster from the silkscreen factory, Puppet's coworker. Hey, he says, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears, and he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Yeah. Any exceptions? No. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. It turns out it's mutual. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we can wait for it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Isn't he a great speaker? I thought he could say it all better than I could. What did you notice?
I love the term walk in your own footsteps.
Yeah.
Just this idea that they're there, you just have to walk in.
And that goes along with the idea before that, when people do something bad, like they are 100% responsible rather than whatever environment they came from, whatever system that produced them. This is the only future that they could see for themselves until someone tells them they're worth more. He uses this phrase a lot, the soul knows its worth. The soul feels its worth from the Christmas song. And I love when he pulls that out. And says, this is our ministry, that the soul would feel its worth. Yeah, Mary.
Yeah. I wish there was somebody like that in every city. He's made such a difference in the thousands of lives. The gift that he has of his own sense of who God is and who he is given so much to others. I got to see a speech of his once before, and as usual, his humor is as good as the rest of him.
Yeah.
He said, I was called into my boss's office, and I don't remember what that was. And I said, sure, I'll show up. And he said, and my boss said to me, do you believe in free speech? And he said, oh, sure. And he says, good, because you're going to give one. That kind of humor just always is in the midst of all of that gentle kindness, which I think is really helpful.
Part of the ministry, right? Yeah.
For the young people.
And he started off with humor, and he just dropped it in quite a few places.
Yeah,
very naturally.
As I was watching this, I was like, oh, I should cut out the jokes for time's sake. I'm like, oh, but the jokes start out the most important stories.
And they set the tone for who he is.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the biggest theme that you heard in that video?
We are one.
We are one. Kinship.
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 Yeah.
It sounds so simple when he says it, doesn't it?
Yeah. It was he has a very, the door is open attitude, doesn't it? It just seems like he's not pushing or coercive, just presenting an open door for people to come through, with the recognition that they're part of the kinship. And I think that's got to be felt on the other side as well.
Yeah. He distinguished between the mutual love and relationship versus serving people, right? I'm not coming in as the person who has something to offer and you're the person who has needs. I'm coming in knowing that we need each other. And we are worth something to each other. There's nobody whose lives are more important or less important. You can stop throwing people away. One of the quotes that I loved from this video, I have it on your sheet, on the bottom half of the first page. The last one, we should never cease to be in awe at the things the poor have to carry, rather than standing in judgment over the way they carry it. And I think it sounds simple, but just like that transformation, if enough people thought that way, could we have the incarceration system that we have? I don't think so. Yeah. Mary.
From the new Jim Crow, the part that was the hardest to read is to read all of the laws that our country has made, that every single president up to the current one have supported and did not questioned. And that includes arming police officers with warlike equipment, guns and everything. And it also had to do with who's called a felon and what a felon can do once they're called a felon. I don't know if that's still true in Washington or King County, but it was true that once a felon. Well, number one is if you're arrested and if somebody comes into your house and somebody else has drugs, you can be arrested also because you didn't get rid of them and you knew it's assumed you knew they had drugs. Once you are charged with something, you are a felon. From then on, you cannot vote, you cannot live in public housing, you cannot get food stamps, you cannot serve in the military. You have to list it on your job application. There isn't any area that's not affected in a person's life. It effectively shuts them out from life. And how much, I don't know, I want to know, and I haven't taken time to learn how much of that is still true in our area, but it is true in a good part of the country still. And most of those people are people of color. One of the examples in the book that Austin is showing you was how the police in Seattle, I mean, this book about the whole of the United States, it took Seattle as an example of how the police target low-income areas for looking for drug dealers on the street. They don't go look for who's in a house, they look for who's on the street. And I'm afraid that's still true here.
You know, along those lines too, it's all about money. I mean, that's just the bottom line. If you have the money, you can hire an attorney to get your family member out of a felony. And if you don't have money, it's a done deal.
Yeah.
And public defenders are so overworked, they cannot possibly really help any one individual.
It's all about money too, and mass incarceration perpetuates the power of people who have money. You know, it keeps the poor in cycles of poverty. It also creates free prison labor that is used in most places around the country. Going back from the chain gang, I didn't put this on your handout, but I was looking up companies that use prison labor, and it is, I think, just about every recognizable company that you could think of that in some aspect of their supply chain uses prison labor for something.
I think that has two sides of it though, because to have some job experience, and it depends on what they're paid, obviously, they're always paid below minimum wage. But if there is a way for them to earn money and to get some skills, there's an upside to it as well.
Absolutely.
But it depends on how it's done.
Yeah.
So my dad volunteered in, gosh, I can't remember what prison, but a prison in California. So once a month he'd go and he'd teach people printing skills. My dad was a printer. And one of the prisoners he hired and came and lived in our small town. But what I really remember is that one day somebody came by. This Phil had been convicted of murder. He had not pulled the trigger, but as a young man, he and a friend robbed a gas station. His friend killed somebody. Phil was on death row for a while. But when Phil was released, he came to work for my dad for years as a printer. But somebody from the town found out and came by and demanded that my dad fire Phil. So there's that stigma too. And
What happened?
of course, my dad did not. No. But that was, I don't know if they still do that kind of training. Obviously, it would be like computers and much more advanced now. But yeah, once a month he went and taught. He ran the printing shop. I want to say it was in I can't remember where it was.
In the prison.
Yeah. But just that retribution, like, you know, did you know a murderer is working for you?
The state of Washington has a pretty extensive department they call correctional industries, which is manufacturing inside the wall. And they're required to pay the inmates somewhere between a minimum wage and the going wage for that particular job that they have. But they have an extensive printing operation, furniture manufacturing, metal casting. Their marketplace is limited to state and local governments, so they're not competing with people in normal industries, as they call it. But at the time I had a connection, it was it was going strong. I think it must still be by now. And it had a very, like Clement has said, it has a very positive influence on the guys developing a a job skill that's actually referenceable on the outside once they get out.
Well, and it gives them some money for when they do get out, because many times they walk out without a dime.
Yeah.
I was going to say, the other thing that concerns me is the death penalty, which is still true in parts of our country. It is the most expensive thing. It is much cheaper not to have the death penalty than if people are concerned about money. The appeal and reappeal and the cost of all of that to the government as well as to the individual far exceeds what it costs to keep that person to continue at least in prison without having to die. That's the lesser of two evils, essentially, but it's the death penalty to me is the if you want to call it, the icing on the cake of the horrible incarceration process that we have.
Yeah. Mark Taylor says that it's a trinity of the carceral system of terror. He is really careful to use the word terror in the way that he's describing the system, which is, you know, something that we think we reserve for people who are outside of America, right? The three aspects of terror are militarized policing, mass incarceration, and the death penalty, and this tripartite system that is just a terror to certain communities, essentially. I'm looking at the time. I'd love to end with a couple quotes. As I was reading, kept finding some great quotes from Martin Luther King. This one's on your sheet. The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it would become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. And hearing that quote next to that graph that has white Christians as the driving force of folks in support of the death penalty in America is dramatic, isn't it?
Thou shalt not kill.
Mm-hmm.
The difference with black Protestants, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We'll send this out.
The next, the ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Returning violence for violence adds deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
And that's what that man that heads the Homeboys shows is love.
Yeah. On the back of the sheet, I added some mission statements from 3 ministries that are doing this work. Underground Ministries, Homeboy Ministries that we just watched, Greg Boyle, and Collective Justice is one that operates in our area. And I love the way that they say our model challenges the legitimacy of punishment as a frontline approach to harm. I love that because it sounds like something that it's in the water that we live in, the air that we breathe, and it's almost like being like, oh, that's not the way things have to be, right?
And cannot Newport then go along with that or join that organization that will support an individual who's in prison who will get out?
They're coming to speak with us next week, Alvin from Underground Ministries. Yeah, and they say that Underground Ministries opens new relationships of embrace and trust between the incarcerated and the communities to which they return for our mutual transformation and resurrection.
Yeah.
That it's not just we have something to offer them, but maybe being in relationship with someone who's been incarcerated is exactly what we need to invigorate our community as well, which I think is a beautiful goal. I heard them speak once, and I heard a woman give a testimony. She was in a church near Mount Vernon, and she was writing letters to someone for a while, and he was out for maybe 3 months in their congregation. They were helping him, and then he disappeared. Later they found him again. I think he showed up in prison, and then after serving a second term, he came out and is back in their community, but said like he was just overwhelmed with the shame, and experiencing people being kind was just heaping on extra shame that he had to deal with. But while he was missing, they felt that they had failed him. Their person that they were supposed to be taking care of had disappeared. And she said when she was driving around the community at night, she would see groups of Hispanic men standing outside. And before she was in relationship with this person, she would, you know, roll up her window, drive a little faster. Like, that's the dangerous part of town. And since she was in a relationship with this person, she would slow her car down and
for
look
him.
closer, because she said, maybe my friend is over there. And I just think that the transformation of that view, it's not us and them, it's just us, is exactly what we should all be striving for. So I don't have a lot of answers of how to do restorative justice, but I wanted to set the stage for next week and just dream a little bit about why and how things might be different.